family, how you doing? My name is Theo E.J. Wilson with African Diaspora News. Now, as you probably noticed, Donald Trump is hell-bent on turning this country into a tin-pot dictatorship, decreasing civil liberties while increasing authoritarianism. His latest move, bringing federal National Guard troops into Washington, D.C., has gotten the world's attention, and as many who are very well versed in the Constitution alarmed about the erosion of our rights as American citizens. And the most problematic element seems to be multiple mayors, governors, and people within a chain of command literally bending the knee to Donald Trump and capitulating to his authoritarian whims. But not all people in the chain of command are ready to be commanded in an unconstitutional way by Donald Trump. And among those voices speaking out in resistance to Donald Trump's authoritarian takeover is our good brother, Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland. Check out what he had to say when it comes to putting his own National Guard troops in Washington, D.C.
I am the commander-in-chief of the Maryland National Guard, period and full stop. That I'm the 63rd governor of the state of Maryland, but along with that means I am the commander-in-chief of our state's National Guard and our state's Air Guard. And I will not authorize the usage of our National Guard for something that is not mission critical or mission aligned, period and full stop. So if the idea comes in, or if the request comes in to mobilize a National Guard in either one of our cities or another city, and I do not deem it to be mission critical or mission aligned, I can give you my answer in one word: no. Because as the commander-in-chief, this is something I take very seriously. And I take it very seriously, both from a professional perspective, but also from a personal perspective. Because unlike the President of the United States, I've actually worn the uniform of this country. Unlike the President of the United States, I actually deployed overseas and fought on behalf of the United States of America. I know what it's like to say goodbye to my family. I know what it's like to wear a U.S.-issued military uniform. I know what it's like to patrol communities. And so I do not need and will not accept any type of lecture from someone who the only uniform they have worn is a Brooks Brothers suit about how to utilize members of the National Guard.
Now, as a member of a military family, as the grandson of a Tuskegee airman, that's how a patriot should talk to a fascist, with uncompromising backbone and spine, letting them know under no conditions is it within their authority to command anybody under their jurisdiction to violate the United States Constitution. So let's take a look at this resistance. You got Governor Wes Moore, you got Governor Gavin Newsom, you got here in Colorado, Governor Jared Polis, all saying, not in my state. So let's look at the inciting incident that got Donald Trump the idea that he should use National Guard troops to stop crime in Washington, D.C. Now, as many of you remember, DOJ had this huge, horribly failed operation earlier in the year that was supposed to be saving the American taxpayer waste, fraud, and abuse. And among the most famous staffers that worked for DOJ at the time was a guy named Edward Korestein, a.k.a. Big. I ain't making this up. That was his actual code name. Well, our good friend Big got beat up in Washington, D.C. by a group of teenagers earlier in this month. Well, his photo after being assaulted went absolutely viral, and of course, it makes it to the desk of President Donald Trump. The issue is, as many of you know, Washington, D.C.'s crime rate is at a 30-year low. There's no indication that it was spiking to the level that it needed troops to stop the crime. So why did Donald Trump feel that he could do this? Well, part of the reason is because Washington, D.C. doesn't have an actual governor. Because of the way that the governance structure was set up in Washington, D.C., the National Guard answers to President Donald Trump since it is the nation's capital. And of course, thinking people have not been quiet about the fact that this crackdown happens to coincide with the people cracking down on him finding those Jeffrey Epstein files. Oh yes, we have not forgotten. Donald Trump is in a unique situation when it comes to his entire presidency's both terms, and that is that he has not been able to change the news cycle at will. The no outrageous thing that he does is throwing the people off the scent of finding those Epstein files, which he promised his base that he would find before the election of 2024. Well, the protesters in Washington, D.C. surrounded the National Guard, making it clear that the people still run stuff around here. And what I think is very interesting is that I've noticed this pattern where the harder Trump tries to crack down, the harder people respond with protests. And the only thing that is giving Donald Trump any kind of hope that he can be successful is that for some reason, the scale is being kept out of the mainstream media. And so the kind of people-powered resistance that you're seeing in Washington, D.C. looks a lot like the people-powered resistance that you saw in Los Angeles, the thing that got Donald Trump sued for violating posse comitatus in the first place, right? They keeping that out of the mainstream media as well. But what was interesting about those protests in Los Angeles was that black folks were largely encouraged to sit this one out. This is everything to do with the Latinos. They voted for Trump, let them handle their consequences, right? I don't think black folks are going to be able to sit this one out in Washington, D.C. Already, we have large-scale protests with black folks at the front. And here's why I think you're going to see that. It's because, ultimately, this crackdown is about us. This crackdown is about our youth. This crackdown is about the fact that they're using a hammer because everything looks like a nail to them. The crime issues in D.C., though they are dipping, they are not non-existent. The homelessness, though it is going down, the homelessness problem is not non-existent. But what they refuse to do is actually address and solve crime and homelessness at its root. And we as a society have known how to do that for a long time. The issue is that we don't have the political will to do that because of some old embedded racism that is at the foundations of the structure of the governance that could solve these problems to begin with. In other words, the true solution to crime, the true solution to homelessness is actually social services that address poverty to begin with. If you eliminate poverty, then you eliminate crimes of poverty. If you eliminate poverty, then you eliminate the homelessness issue. And what does that involve? That involves us creating the kind of social safety nets that get people accused of being socialist, even though capitalist countries use these social safety nets all the time. For example, Finland darn near eliminated its homelessness using a system called Housing First. What is Housing First? Exactly what it sounds like. What you do to fight homelessness is to put unhoused people inside of houses. And then you create wraparound services that not only address their addiction issues, not only address the fact that they haven't had cleanliness readily available to them, but these social services from the Housing First program shovel them into the economy so that they are becoming wage earners instead of bulldozing their tents like they're doing in Washington, D.C. and so many other cities across America. But if you look at the pattern of Western societies, you'll see that white folks generally don't have a problem with socialism until that socialism starts benefiting black folks. You saw that here with all of the measures that were put in place after the World War II and Great Depression era. A lot of people accuse black folks of exploiting welfare and exploiting unemployment benefits. Well, the problem with that narrative is that we weren't even allowed to participate in them for the first 30 years of their existence. Not until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 could black folks end up participating in any of the social safety net measures that were designed for white folks. And as soon as we could, now you have the dog whistle politics calling those who are participating in these programs originally meant for white folks freeloaders, welfare queens, and leeches on the system. You and I know that the majority of the crimes of poverty are committed by youth. And if those youth have opportunities and things to do, we know that those youth will do other things if they have especially a healthy relationship with a productive adult in their lives. And we know this because we can look at the crime statistics in the black community going out of the 90s and into the early thousands. Now, what happened in the 90s is there was a huge crime spike that wasn't just in America, it was all over the westernized world. But what did America do? Black Americans began to institute after-school programs, mentorship programs, and organically, the FBI saw this data where organic, community-led initiatives, violence interruption programs, dropped the crime in the black community. And the problem with those things was that they were entirely too effective. Community-led programs that was interrupting the violence, that was bringing the crime rate down, began to be defunded. And the police forces got all the money. We know what works. And the fact that they don't want to do what works is the reason why America is falling behind the entire Western world when it comes to our quality of life, our social mobility, our crime rates, you name it. Because when you have systems in place that are there to oppress and harm black folks, what you essentially have is Americans harming other Americans and keeping the American quality of life low, just in pursuit of this fake hierarchy, this caste system that we call race. And instead of addressing the problem at its root, they put boots on the ground, they put cops in the streets, and they put a narrative out that says that these people can only be controlled by force. And that is exactly what Donald Trump is doing in Washington, D.C. And hopefully, governors and people in authority who don't follow his authoritarian whims, we can start really addressing these problems at their roots. As we're going to see, Donald Trump's solutions, again, just won't work. My name is Theo E.J. Wilson. Till next time.